So we're going to begin with a quote from Walter Benjamin from Illuminations. As flowers turn toward the sun by dint of a secret heliotropism, the past strives to turn toward that sun which is rising in the sky of history. Today I'm going to move fluidly between poetry and essay to present some nascent thoughts on lyric solarity. I want to suggest lyric solarity is a poetics in which solar imaginaries are linguistically mediated and refracted through the close rhythms, affects, sensoria, and arts of noticing associated with the focalized energies of lyric poetry. Lyric solarity enacts an embodied poetics of dissolve, exposure, surplus, saturation, and excess or residue. It offers a way of turning towards the sun while helping us make, in the words of Imre Ziman, quote, commitments to reshaping the existing infrastructures which underpin access to and distribution of energy. So while the Anthropocene, which is a sort of proposed epoch defined by humankind's sort of ascendance as a geological agent, is often understood as an issue of scale, attending to the solar helps us think about planetary crisis in terms of distribution and density of harmed resources and changes to climate or energy. And I was struck by the previous panel when we were talking about water as a kind of very contested issue, and so infrastructure is really part of conflicts, and I think a lot of the stuff around the Anthropocene is not just about scale and time, but also about distribution and infrastructure. So I take energy here to mean both the power derived from physical or chemical resources, the property of matter and radiation manifest as a capacity to perform work, but also in the sense of an organism's energy, their metabolism, vitality, ongoingness within the world, and its working demands or desires. And some of this comes from Will Alexander's idea of transmutation. So what follows is less of an argument than a set of propositions and possibilities, a selection of field notes in search of lyric solarity. 1. Sans Soleil. In Chris Marker's film Sans Soleil, often translated into English as sunless, we begin with a line from T.S. Eliot's Ash Wednesday, quote, "Because I know that time is always time and place is always and only place." The film begins again with an image of 3 children in Iceland, quote, "an image of happiness," accompanied by black film leader. The voiceover suggests that if viewers can't find happiness in the image of the children, quote, at least they'll see the black. The film is itself a kind of lyric documentary on human memory, how memory is fragile, and so our recall of personal and political histories, especially on a global or even planetary scale, is inflected or reworked in the lyric present. In the spring of 2020, I approached the film as a kind of memory place. I had never seen such spring sunshine in Glasgow, but due to COVID, I was locked down inside my own sunless tenement. What follows violates perhaps Eliot's insistence on the essential containment of space and time. Eliot, I guess, never used the internet. I was messaging the poet Fred Spolier, and suddenly it was the solstice, and we wanted to mark it somehow. We began this remote collaboration, not in response to Marker's film so much as through it, or some residue within it, a blemish or shine, a bright spot, a blind spot, a kind of fleck on its vision. We wrote remotely, wrote live, and in those hours of shared writing, we existed in a solar time, where solarity was a quality of memory, its absence, our absence, and yet also speculation towards something better, waiting for rays of arrival. In that sense, the poem is about the uses and abuses of pastoral, about an elsewhere to be written around, glimpsed, squinted at, but never quite accessed. It's also about the temporal alignment of 2 people writing together in different sort of parts of the country. Lyric as a thought device for telecommunicating something of a paraworld hidden in language. I'd fall asleep with our phrases like film credits flashing behind my eyes. We wrote between the summer and winter solstices of 2020. We split lines with sun cloud emoji. Here's some of the opening sequence of the poem, and as Shani said, it's here if you want to have a browse. Ultraviolet rose us, spilled into formless unration of atoms, and we spend ourselves back. The day extends pores, folding up in lux ellipsis, hills and hills of recessional cloud cast debt between us, rolling one-sided to release it. All of I'm rain cast through fierce aureate, disquietude, To not say hope this finds you, or nearest the soft motif of your hair, bright spots around the anti-solar point, balayage of except champagne never sets. In a forest image, I cannot touch you, or notify through light that drowsy reminder we are many. Something decorative in the cold soak of sylvanshine gives up its entrance. The long day composed of such stills is lying back from its voyage. To say all of the land escapes, an exorbitant teardrop, a teardrop. I have these ambient hands, I wring the leaves. 2. Solar Apocalypse. In Eto Adnan's poetry sequence, The Arab Apocalypse, from 1989, the sun is variously a shape-shifting trickster, a totalizing energy, an authority, a marker of time, a blinding force, a monster, a pool of blood, and many other things. Here are some of Adnan's lines taken from across the book. Quote, I took the sun by the tail and threw it in the river. Explosion. Boom. The sun is contaminated by the city. The sun has eaten its children. A sun rotten and eaten by worms floats over Beirut. Silence is sold by the pounds. Eat and vomit the sun, eat and vomit the war. Here an angel explodes. The brain is a sun, stop. The sun is an eye. The sun's atoms are incarnating in my flesh. Stop. Stop. The sun is a kind of virus, pulsing and multiplying, changing form and colour, nourishing and deadly, making things grow or die, a kind of white noise in the context of war, a vulnerable body, a weapon, a machine of surveillance, a carnal threat. In the American Book Review, Barbara Harlow says of Adnan's poem that it, quote, invokes a mythic past to presage a present that resists narration. To presage is to be a warning sign, a prediction, typically of something unpleasant. In archaic meaning, presage is an omen, a feeling of foreboding. In The Arab Apocalypse, Adnan writes back and forward to historical crises. As Aditi Machado points out in an essay for Jacket 2, the poem was begun in January 1975 in Beirut, 2 months before the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War. But there is also a generalized economy of violence, exposure, and replenishment which speaks to the 20th century at large, and indeed to the explosions, contaminations, and environmental atrophying of the 21st century. As Harlow identifies, the simultaneous coagulating geopolitical crises of the times, what we might call the Anthropocene, which is obviously a contested term and that we is contested too, but these crises are often resistant to narrative. The recurrent modulating figure of the sun has more of a lyric quality, beaming and seeping, punctuated by telegraphic lines, those stop signals of break and transition. Language garners a lyric intensity which is elemental, saturating, overspilling the traditional bounds of a human eye. Impressive and god-sized dramas of the stars and planets play out in a mythopoetics of Beirut, of Gilgamesh, of, quote, grass snakes hiding in the texture of time, in Adnan's words. 3. More sun to consider in lyric. Julia Kristeva's Black Sun, the music of Sun Ra, Jackie Wang's Sunflower, Sean Bonney's Solar Cop, the shine sprites in the video game Super Mario Sunshine, Georges Bataille's Solar Love, David Schwartzman's Solar Communism, Ali Warren's Sundial, the photographic process of the anthotype, Bjork's song Sun in My Mouth, Catherine Wagner's line, quote, if everything is from the sun, why praise it? 4. Shimmer. In Paul Klee's painting Castle and Sun from 1929, the castle is line-drawn in myriad geometry. Its surface is of different coloured shapes set underneath a bright orange sun. In proximity, the colours shimmer and vibrate. If there was a patchwork made of Adnan's poem, it might be something like this, or indeed one of her own geometric, brightly coloured abstractions. Shimmer is to shine with a soft, wavering light. It offers a coming to knowledge distinct from the Enlightenment regime of shining a light on your subject. It is a way of making contact, of existing in non-linear, non-narrative, and that is to say, lyric time-space. In her 2018 book, Surge, Adnan writes, quote, we came to transmit the shimmering from which we came. In the shimmering tautology, we yet cross a line, continue transmission in the poem. Shimmer is instrumental in what I call hypercritique, a poetical form of writing which orients not to the capture of time, meaning, or ecological reality, but to a beyond. 5. Solar Commons. Solarity as commons hinges on a promise. Solar, writes Jimin, quote, names the promise of clean energy, it is also the promise of infinite energy. Unlike the earthly resources of fossil fuels, the sun in some sense cannot run out, or at least for the next 5 billion years, reach peak as oil has. A poetry of solarity is one which implicitly dwells upon the promise of sociality and ecological relation, of alternative scales and temporalities of energy infrastructure and organisation, felt within and beyond the speaker's human sensorium. The promise of infinity is something akin to that of utopia. It is a processual, to some extent impossible gesture towards expansion, relation and infrastructure that might happen apart from existing capitalist definitions of growth and the grid. A promise is not guaranteed, as Jennifer Rushforth reminds us, paraphrasing the work of Jacques Derrida. Promises, quote, are thinkable only under conditions of uncertainty and doubt, and every true promise is therefore haunted by the possibility of failure. Promises, she argues, are by nature excessive and in constant danger of coming to naught. The hopeful risk of lyric solarity is that it offers not illusory plenitude, but the infrastructural imaginary of cognitively and bodily orienting the singularity of a speaker, an addressee within an alternative or hypothetical place of contingent ecological relation. A binge on infinity, announces the speaker in Anna Leslie Selker's poem From Anime. Quote, I cannot achieve generality, I ride myself into the sunset. The anaphoric force of Selker's I functions as a kind of avatar self, driven in the display of action and event, caught as the debris of the meta-narratives of the Anthropocene, projected as in filmic particles of light, quote, into extinction. Cinematic, often Western tropes of sunset as telos, are figured as only the flickering potential of closure. If the poem ends with a sunset, it is only through lyric iteration, and even then, generality is not achieved. The poem's infinity is contained in the singularity's, quote, ascending trap within the crooked time of work, the recursion of failure, the illumined rejoinder of our solar story, the black screens of Sans Soleil. 6. Dream photosynthesis. While writing Chlorophilia, a pamphlet I had published by Orange Apple Press in summer 2020, I started taking St. John's wort, known for its yellow, star-shaped flowers, ideal for a sun garden, also known as Hypericum prolificum, from the Greek hyper and akon, meaning over an apparition. It was once believed, and perhaps still is, that the flower has power over demons, ghosts, or evil spirits. I wanted these herbal pills to exercise my own black bile. I read that the side effects include increased sensitivity to sunlight, and wondered if the cost or benefit for relieving my mood disorder might be photosynthesis. The poems I wrote at this time imagined language as a kind of vine, a cellular structure, clusters of foliage, sun-fed pollen clouds, pain relief. I'm interested in what smudges of energy are bodied by or survive in lyric: lightness, elegia, speech, abundance, melancholia, or chlorophilia, meaning something like a love of green. So I'm going to end with a poem not from that pamphlet, but with something more recent, a short extract taken from a longer poem, Midsummer Song, which opens my PhD thesis, Hypercritique towards a lyric architecture for the Anthropocene. It's just one page. I want you to read this as if together to mash discourse from coal fire, sunlessness, as if to weave lyric from cinders, the terrible love of spiders, moving lapidary over this glass house in which the hawthorn tea is served, and you are sitting down to the architecture of this poem around you, squeezed and rippled by what hungover streams through. It is always the transmutation of this other heart, whose capacity to swell aspires to solarity so easily, walking into the auto-explosion that would upset their web, silvering impossible beauty, and to shake these addictions. If a dream comes disposing the waste years of research, electronica cathecting zonular forms, hoarding data for twilights ahead, when they said we have 10 years to turn this around, I had only just started to get turned. It was a funded period. If this poem is also dream media, does it control the way you read? Dreaming the pause from algorithm, future nutrition, the bright green trees in the mirror. But I have faith in photosynthesis, says Robin Wall Kimmerer. The way you read is also moss, impossible burger, and lichenous ventriloquism of fungi and algae, not to exist in pure symbiosis with the way you think, but to care for each other, in the time of the poem, coming always too late and early, the energy you need. I get this email with the subject heading, I have no dream job, I do not dream of labour.